courtesy of Busy56. This is a continuation of the discussion we had regarding the South Park episode number 330. And there are a lot of people who want to say, let's move on. I'm like, no, you have to understand that's Westworld syndrome speaking. We don't move on to the next shiny object. We have to maintain a continuity here. So I pinned a chart that I made, which is the Psyops programming timeline: past, present, future, predictive programming, concurrent programming, reinforcement programming. And then on the bottom of this chart, on this column, associated with the past, present, future, you have history, news, and meta-scripted future events. So you have to look at these things on a timeline. All of these events that occur on the fake timeline that's superimposed over our real timeline, these events exist in their own fictional universe, and there's a continuity that you have to observe. That's why you don't just move on and like, oh, we've already debunked this. Not quite. There's a reason why truthers haven't gone anywhere with this information in decades. They've been stuck in Trutherville. Why? It's because they're repeating the same news cycle. Every news cycle is treated like a brand new thing. That's Westworld, living the same day over and over. And you don't escape the sim until you recognize the continuity. Well, we have to recognize the continuity in the propaganda. So no, we're not going to just, all right, let's close the book on Charlie Kirk's thing. It's time to move on. No, not going to hear that. Ribo Nation says, new Stranger Things programming dropped last night. Yeah, I was tempted to stay up and binge watch. But back to this Charlie Kirk thing. So we had already noted the significance of it and how it platformed Charlie Kirk to a bunch of people who had never heard of him before by putting him on this popular show. South Park's like the new Simpsons when it comes to predictive programming. And it set it up. Right there, episode 330, we were primed for the event. Well, Busy56 played some clips, and I posted these on Twitter, where it's even more specific than just putting Charlie Kirk out there. You have the Kirk-esque character being asked a question after he brings up something about gender. And you remember the shooting happened in the context of a conversation about gender and guns. So here he is actually addressing the trans thing, and then he gets attacked, where he gets knocked off the left side of the chair. Now, the person asking the question is blonde and looks like the guy who was talking to Charlie Kirk asking the final question. So now you have the Kirk thing, the timing of it. You have the person asking the question, getting knocked off the chair, and the nature of the question itself. These are four specifics, and then the timing of it. This tells you that, yeah, exactly, Busy. They had a crisis actor that looked like Butters. So the crisis actor who asked the final question, the guy that we saw rehearsing his reaction before it happened, he looks like the South Park character who was talking to the Kirk character before he gets knocked off the chair to the left. What I'm saying here is that even the setup of it, it looked like the setup for Charlie Kirk's tour. Well, if you're familiar with it, that was the America Comeback Tour. That was day one. We had no idea what it was going to look like. Normally, he's up there on a stage in a nice chair. You know, there's various venues. He's like in churches, but we've never seen him inside of a tent with a bunch of flashy posters behind him. I mean, we have on these college campuses, there are some similar things, but I don't know. This one looked like it was modeled off of the one from Utah. So I'm looking at this as, okay, at a minimum, you have four specific elements in the PSYOP that were preceded in South Park, aside from the timing of it. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells us, first of all, that Kirk's not dead, and anybody still engaging in that conjecture is lost in the weeds. They're just lost. You're on some rabbit trail. You're maybe malnourished from all these nutritionless breadcrumbs that they're leaving for you. I mean, nothing burgers and breadcrumbs. But it's a wasteland. Trutherville is a wasteland. And if you're still on the fence, I don't know if he's dead, I don't know if he's alive, you've been gaslit. Victims of gaslighting can no longer rely on their own perceptions to make decisions. They outsource it to the gaslighter. That's the dynamic that's established. The screen, the ubiquitous black mirror, is your gaslighter. The media gaslights you all the time. They tell you, don't trust your senses, don't trust your own observations, trust what we tell you. And what I'm seeing here is when there are people like, I don't know if he is. It's like, okay, they've taken away your confidence in your own ability to take a stand based on the available evidence. So I'm making this easier here now because we're not just pointing out the obvious of faked events, but we're getting into backdating the original psychological operations script, which would be handed to the propaganda outlets who are creating predictive content and concurrently released content, obviously produced in advance, but also the stuff at the same time that's happening on the day. There are certain elements that are repeated throughout. So what I'm pointing out here is that you can now look at this stuff as on a timeline. It's predictive programming, becomes concurrent programming the day of, and then everything that follows is reinforcement programming because they just reinforce the official view. So this corresponds to past, present, future, or history, news, and then the script, the meta-scripted future events. So there's a continuity. In other words, the future event that's planned to occur occurs in the news. Then it becomes history. So we're having this secondary timeline processed concurrently with what we live in reality, outside of the mediated version, but they overlap and they're blended. This is what Baudrillard referred to as hyper-reality. Well, we're there. We're already there. And now looking at this, it becomes very clear that these bigger platforms that have the reach to reach the multitudes who are going to be hit with the psychological operation, they're serving the same end as the news media, which is they're assisting in the manufacturing of staged, historically significant events. So we can stop calling them hoaxes. That minimizes it, and it's inaccurate. These aren't simply hoaxes. These are staged, historically significant events. These are the turning points, the goalposts, or the turning points. These are the significant events that the entire collective of news consumers are reacting to. It's all in one big echo chamber. But what's more, the indications that these things are planned far in advance is just essentially proof positive that these things aren't happening for real, that they are in fact staged. And this means that none of the output from alt media is valid. You realize that no big channel in alt media entertains the idea that these events are staged. They treat everything as organic with a secondary culprit. That's it. Alt media is a huge hoax. Alt media is a conspiracy against conspiracy theorists. And a lot of them aren't going to wake up. They're not going to figure this out. I finished watching that Climate Trails documentary. Very low effort, agitprop, emotional appeals, logically fallacious in every way. Totally dishonest. And that's the level of slop that convinces the average truther. Like right now in the sky, I see a cirrus cloud created by there's a couple of them by the sun there. You can see those in the sky. They would see that as poison sprayed from an airplane. Well, it's not a spray. Every airplane has one thing in common. They've got engines. And what do the engines do? They leave a trail of hot air, hot exhaust. Well, what do you think that hot exhaust is going to do in freezing temperatures at 30,000 feet? Like, it's really, again, it's not rocket surgery here. Condensation trails are predictable. They exist. They knew there was going to be a trail before they flew up there. And if that plane were to fall from the sky at a steep angle, would there be a contrail following it to the ground? No. The contrails aren't going to be created below the stratosphere. So when they call it stratospheric aerosol injections, no, the reason why they're on the stratosphere or at the stratospheric level is the temperature. They're not injections, they're not sprays. But anyway, I'm just saying that the gullibility is engineered and that the entire premise of chemtrails and geoengineering being this like weather weapon thing, that's financed from above. It's no different than the climate change eschatology, and it has the same goal. Dark Ghost Wind says, there's no waking up or staying asleep. There's only the acceptance of the idea that you, a flawed human being, might be wrong, but most people do not want to accept being wrong. Yeah, that's one of the biggest guardrails, actually, is the ego. It's one of the first and the last. The first guardrail to overcome, to leave Normieville, is to recognize that you've been wrong. So it's a blow to the ego, I suppose. And so some people are held back by that because they can't admit they're wrong. If you can admit that you're wrong, yeah, you make it into Trutherville. And then you cling to these alternative myths, and maybe at some point somebody brings up to you that, hey, this is wrong as well. Well, that's where I'm finding a lot of truthers are stuck. They think they found the truth, they internalize the label truther, and they cannot admit that they were duped a second time. Yeah, they got you again. You just have to own it or stay where you are, and most of them are going to stay where they are. What's Happening says, there would be no need for crisis actors if the events were false flags. All reactions would be organic, and they're obviously not. Yeah, that's true, because when I watch real violence on X, like people getting shot, beaten, and killed, the organic reactions are qualitatively different than what you see with these actors who are staying in frame. Like, I'm going to weep in front of the camera. No, when you see people who are seriously bereaved or in shock, they're not going to stay in frame. And oftentimes, the way that they mourn or panic is, there's something sporadic and random animalistic about it. You don't get that level of acting. But yeah, if these things were false flags, you wouldn't need actors. Because there would be real organic witnesses, which would actually be more powerful as propaganda. Because I have a little bit of empathy left in me sometimes. And when I see somebody screaming in pain, like, or getting shot at or something, I can kind of like, okay, that's pretty hard to watch. But these actors on the screen don't have that same visceral response. They don't generate the same visceral, like, gut level response. Like, I identify with this. It's horrifying. Now, what we're really getting at here, though, is that the alternative media is going to remain rooted in their point of view, and we're not trying to change their minds. What we're trying to do is we're trying to aggregate those who see past the alternative media deceptions, which are parallels to the mainstream ones. And so you're going to have to expect a lot of blowback, which I'm getting. I'm getting a lot of people who are like chemtrail pushers who are like, you're messing with my belief system, bro. Why can't you just let us believe in chemtrails? Yeah, you can believe in them. I'm doing you a favor by pointing out, though, that your belief is predicated upon an inability to see through loaded questions or to recognize a faulty causality fallacy. And if you're happy walking around with these holes in your mental immune system, these vulnerabilities, with essentially a compromised mental immune system, then go for it. And that's where a lot of people are at. But again, we're not trying to change their minds. The reason why I'm even doing the book promotion where I'm going to confront, or rather not confront, but engage in normies, is I'm exposing it for our benefit, for this third branch of media, this newly emerged perspective. It's not even a third branch because we're not part of the media. The media is a duopoly. It's got two branches, alt and main. And they also have, of course, this political horseshoe dynamic built into it. But we're not a third branch. We're not even a divergence, really. We're a separatist movement. We're a separate platform. What's Happening says, truthers will defend their beliefs religiously. The ego guardrail's insurmountable for these intellectually dishonest children. And look, they do push this propaganda like it's drugs. I got one person in one of my chats who's trying to tell people, don't listen to this guy. He's not an anti-vaxxer. He's probably vaccinated. It's like, okay, well, by your ridiculous arguments, I should be dead if that were true. And you have to also recognize that the alternative media people do not have the moral high ground on anything, on any of these issues. Because to the extent that they're pushing controlled opposition, they're pushing psychological warfare on you. Oh, you should be afraid of cell phone towers and UPC codes and clouds and fill in the blank. And then they open the gates to woke rightism that gets mixed in with the red pill conspiracies. And now they're suddenly worried about white genocide, illegal immigrants, and culture war stuff, which infuse the whole conspiracy community. But we're witnessing something really intriguing now with this whole Candace Owens thing. We're witnessing the engineering of like a reboot of the origins of the conspiracy counterculture following JFK. So the conspiracy theory counterculture is government engineered. Sync Kid says, are you identifying with absurdism or existentialism? Well, I think the world stage is a tragic comedy, and we're doing film critiques, essentially. We're criticizing the world stage, the theater of Psywar. You know, this is the Globe Theater. Yeah, people used to say the UPC codes, if you add the numbers or you look at the bars, it's a 666. And the cell phone tower is going to kill you, the radio towers. The Antichrist is going to summon his legions through the cell phone towers. And like, now it's 5G towers. But they're always updating their propaganda. At the latter half of climate trails, they're talking about HARP. Like that old canard. Like they're heating the atmosphere and causing hurricanes. One of the guys, the one who said he's afraid to go outside because of the clouds, he said that they're murdering people. That it's murder. Chemtrails are murder. King Ravana says, alt media wants us to believe there's assassination teams at all the Mandalay Bay hotels. Anonymous says, I will defend my disbelief in mainstream propaganda religiously. Well, I said this 2 years ago and I got pushback. And anytime I get pushback, I know I'm onto something. So I said, we need to approach the mainstream media as though we were atheists, insofar as it has become a religion with all of its myths and God constructs and faulty reasoning and its, fallacious God of the gaps reasoning built into it in so many ways, where it's a new religion. We've been given miracles and we've, been born into it. So there's no, there's no shame in being a nasatologist. I understand it. But I said, the way to deconstruct this is to look at it not as a set of political ideologies, but let's look at it as a religion. Because the people who are arriving at these beliefs aren't doing so because they're reality testing their claims, or they're in any way engaged in some kind of rigorous observations and critical analysis. No, they're just accepting these as beliefs, as myths, being propagated to them from a priesthood. So we are essentially atheists to the world state church and their God constructs and their heaven and their new iterations of eschatologies and things like sin that they've reintroduced for this secular world order. But no, we're the non-believers. So we're not religious. We're non-believers. We're skeptics. And by non-believers, it's not a position of ignorance. That's the irony. The people who believe the stuff believe in it in ignorance. They're closed-minded. Because if your opinions originate from the world stage, it's a closed informational system. By definition, you're closed-minded if you haven't reached outside of that. What's happening says, we're taking the least logical leaps when we come to our conclusions. These people's beliefs are taken akin to religious faith with giant leaps. Well, that's what I mean, is that we're not arriving at disbelief by just saying we don't believe it. We're not contrarian. We disbelieve it because additional facts invalidates their essential claims. So we know more than the believers do about what they believe in, and yet we don't believe. How do you explain that? Well, the reason why is pretty simple. Low information belief is rooted in faith. We have high information, which takes us away from belief because the facts don't support it. So that's why I say we are informed non-believers. And the position of informed disbelief can be defended. We can rest upon it. We stand on it. We can defend it. The believers can only lean into media. It's like, you want to defend a mainstream media proposition, what's your evidence? I saw it on CNN. I heard it on Fox News. It's in the newspapers. Like, that's your standard of evidence. It's actually pathetic, and you can't stand on it. And furthermore, if your assertion that an event is real only rests upon that, and you haven't addressed any of the hoax indicators that we have presented, then your position is even less substantial because you haven't addressed the hoax indicators, which, if you are truly intending to defend your point of view, you should look at the contrary evidence. And if you're not willing to, then what is that? That's willful ignorance and blindness, typical of the religious. Religious people are, and this isn't a criticism, it's just a fact, they're very ignorant about the things they believe in, but they accept that their ignorance is actually a way for them to be faithful, which they see as a virtue. So they make a virtue out of ignorance. They just call it mystery and faith, which is, of course, bullshit, but I'm not going to tell people what to believe or what not to believe. I'm only actually reaching out to those who are not of the same perspective of mainstream or alternative. If your perspective on world events as portrayed through the media is inclusive of media fakery, news bending, history bending, and you recognize the continuity of fakery and how it constitutes a constant presence as it's being reinforced and merged with our shared history, if that's your perspective, you don't have representation in alternative media. You have zero representation. The IPS think tank is it. We are the center of this because there isn't any other platform that has made this their basis. So the off-world stage perspective is the one that recognizes the program, which I would define as the parallel timeline of fake events superimposed onto our real timeline. So again, this is hyper-reality. We live in a mix of real and fake. Some of us have disabused ourselves of believing in the fake, but others have not. And this is exactly analogous to living among religious people in a theocracy where they believe all kinds of myths and they trust their priesthood faithfully, implicitly, no skepticism, and we're the ones who figured out that their entire religious paradigm is fake. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us outnumbered with no platform. So our solution here is to create our own platform, and we've done this. And this is the time that we scale up. Thank you, Thirst for Truth. Appreciate the support. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. If you're just getting here, I'm talking about how the new South Park, or the South Park 330, the one with the Charlie Kirk character, has more than just a Charlie Kirk character and conspicuous timing relevant to the shooting. He gets knocked off his chair to the left. The questioner looks like the guy who was actually asking Charlie Kirk a question. And the question was relevant to gender ideology, which ties into the shooting as well. So multiple points of overlap here. You could even throw in, if you wanted to, the whole episode 330 with the 33 hours it took to catch the shooter. But you can see here that this is proof, positive, of South Park working as a propaganda conduit for concurrent programming. Lost Age says, Christian decoders have popped up on my feed talking bad about you, Tim. Yeah, the Christian decoders are noise, and they should be blocked. What they're doing is they're taking evidence of our timeline manipulation through staged historic events, and they're running it through their Jewish gematria calculators and arriving at connections that are made up, but create the perception that man could not have engineered this, or if it was man, it was whatever group of people used Jewish magical numerology. I wonder who that is. You see how they operate here. Every major truth or conspiracy points the fingers at Jews, just like all the major narratives on the far left point at whiteness. So that they fall into that because they're using Jewish gematria. And if you don't know what Jewish gematria is, we're talking about the way that the Hebrew characters also have numbers, numerical values. Therefore, every word has a number associated with it. And what the rabbis would do with the Torah is they would add the numbers of verses and words and show connections between other verses and words. So in other words, they're showing, hey, look, the connections within the scriptures could only have been put there by a higher power like God. So they're proving the divine origin of their scriptures using gematria. Now, that's logically fallacious, obviously. Texas sharpshooter fallacy, confirmation bias, selectivity bias. Yeah, it's a very fallacious way to approach things, but it's in the context of convincing themselves that God wrote their books. So now what's happening is truthers have taken the gematria out of the rabbis' hands, out of the Torah, and they're applying it to the news. So they're using the same exact fallacies to make the claim that this secret group is encoding the world events. So it's an indirect way of blaming Jews for everything, one. And then two, these are Christian decoders. And so they're using it to prove that it's some kind of spiritual revelation. And what they're doing here is they're taking evidence of propaganda inserted into entertainment for the purposes of reinforcing the Psyops. They're taking away the focus on man manipulating man, and they're attributing it to something mystical. So it's noise. They're adding noise to our signal. And so I'm blocking a lot of these individuals because they're taking the stuff that we bring up, like we brought up Hulu's The Tempest, and instead of looking at the connection between that and the event and what it says about media itself, objectively, what do? They take the names of the actors, run it through their calculators and their birth dates, and say, 666 months ago, this person graduated from this college. And it's like, wait a minute here. You're going into their past and backdating events and making these connections. It's absurd. But it's by design. It's disinformation. I'm talking about all of them. They all follow the same formula. Joseph Aquafina admits that he's often wrong. But here's the thing. You're allowed to be wrong. You know, you can go play with Ouija boards or, you know, do whatever you want to do when you're trying to interpret the news. It's not my business. But what I'm pointing out is that the big channels out there have the right data and they're plugging it into the wrong model. They're noise. We have no reason to basically, we have no reason to validate their views. So I'm no longer retweeting these people. I'm no longer validating, hey, you have a point. These two events do seem related, because the way they're arriving at their connections is completely fallacious. These aren't organic. And the reason why they're doing it is that if they can show you 100 crazy connections that would have necessitated some kind of God to have orchestrated it, they have effectively disguised the nature of the media's ability to deceive us, how it's rooted in the control over all media monolithically, including directors, writers, actors, all contributing to this manufacturing of our history through simulated events. I mean, we're talking about psychological operations and psychological warfare, and they're taking it into their religion. So I'm saying, yeah, Lost H says, I went into the comments on one of them and got hit with a Christ is King. Yeah, I'm totally fine. We want to be outgrouped from these people. We don't want them to continue to add noise to our signal. And if they want to be left, if they want to be on the wrong side of the screen, if they want to serve the system they're pretending to oppose, let them. I mean, who cares? Like I was telling Lloyd this morning, nothing personal, but I'm like, you know, you are controlled opposition. If you uphold any alternative narratives, You might think you have great intentions, but it doesn't change the fact that you're actually controlled opposition. If you're a propaganda mule for alt media agitprop, then you're actually serving the system, spreading their fear-based propaganda. How does that give you the moral high ground? You're not waking people up, you're encouraging them to fall into the simulation and the nightmare version of it. Armin Ross says, is jail included? Jurassic Liars is an interesting case. He's kind of an outlier in this. But his religiosity and my rejection of religion has always been something that we've set aside. Lost Age said, I would say they're mudding up the waters, but it ain't our waters. Well, it kind of is, because I tweeted my chart that showed the timeline for Psyop programming, the past, present, future, the continuity. And one of these number crunchers retweets me. And I'm like, no, I can't have that. You're not going to take my research. You're not going to take our objective breakdown of mass media and plug it into your word salad shooter and run like you're one of us. We have higher standards than that. Anonymous says unwitting controlled opposition. Well, no, they're no longer unwitting. If they're aware of the Psyop entertainment complex and they continue to promulgate the alternative media, then they're consciously participating in it. They're no longer unwitting controlled opposition. And if you get called controlled opposition and you don't want to be that, what would you do? Wouldn't you, let me revise my opinions and make sure I'm not inadvertently poisoning the well? No, you don't have that. They double down. I had one of the controlled opposition agents that I entertained. She was in my comments telling people, don't listen to this guy. He's not an anti-vaxxer. Like, yeah, I'm anti-vaxxer. You think you're going to save people from me? You haven't saved anybody. It's a delusion that you're actually a hero when you're spreading alt media claptrap. So we have to take away their moral high ground. They've already ceded the intellectual high ground. That's already that's already over with. Because they're not using their intellect to arrive at conclusions if they have a belief-based, and low information at that, a belief-based methodology for getting information. Remember, alt media, like mainstream, is passive. They are passive consumers of propaganda and news stories. You're only active if you go outside of their parameters and gain additional intel. And additional intel now includes the continuity of fake events and how these are all interconnected. There was that caller the other night, Kevin Mooring, who said, why are the people who are questioning the ability of Charlie Kirk's neck to stop a bullet not questioning the ability of Donald Trump's ear to deflect a bullet? I was like, that's a valid question. But yeah, we want to kick a few hornets' nests because the people who react emotionally aren't ready for the off-world stage perspective. That's another element to it. The controlled opposition and the mainstream both require a great deal of reactivity from the news consumers. Loosh extraction, which I use that concept loosely, but they need your emotional engagement. Why? Well, because your emotions override your intellect. You're more likely to fall for a logical fallacy or two or three if you're emotionally engaged. Emotional appeals are rampant in this thing. We're very much detached. Like, I have a very detached perspective. We were talking about the National Guardsmen getting shot. Well, at no point did I start off with, this might be real. No, I'm like, no, this occurs in the wake of the death of Dick Cheney and all the follow-up 9/11 stuff. And we were saying then, why is all this 9/11 stuff being brought back? Planes being grounded, firemen injured in an explosion, planes hitting buildings, Dick Cheney dying, 9/11 coded event. And my tweet describing the 9/11 codes has more than 500,000 hits. So we're saying, well, what is the purpose of it? Well, it's likely that they're bringing out Islamic terrorism onto the world stage. So we're getting like a rerun of programming. And that's what we got. And that's what's happening right now. If you look at the lens through which people are interpreting the shooting, it's not, oh, some guardsmen got shot by some psycho, some lefty. No, it's Islamic terrorism. We must deport the Muslims. We're getting all that kind of stuff again. So we're getting a lot of post 9/11 type rhetoric all of a sudden. Well, we've been primed for it. Remember, Cheney dies, Muslim mayor gets elected, and then you've got all these 9/11 related events, white powder, the explosion, and then at Madison Square Garden is there. You've got a UFC fight number 322, and the winner is some guy named Islam. So Islam wins in New York. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Lost Age says, at least some Christians see the CK event was a psyop, yet they won't let go of the Gematria religious program. Yeah, I almost feel like religion's a guardrail. And I don't know what to do. I mean, I don't really have any problem with it, but I'm saying it's like, if you're going to cling to any of these religious perspectives on alt media, you're not going to get out. And I would even question, why are Christian truthers who think that Israel is the main cause of evil in the world, why are they using Jewish mysticism when they look at their news? Like, I got, oh, here's the morning paper, and here's your coffee. Oh yeah, give me my Jewish gematria calculator. Like, this is cultural appropriation. All these rabbi truthers, red pill rabbis. Isn't that ridiculous? I mean, I think it's ridiculous. But they don't get it. They're being played for fools, because the implication is that if you were able to find this type of code in the events, it therefore suggests that guess who did it? Well, it wasn't some kind of, Norse gang, some Aryan Brotherhood thing. No, obviously it's Jewish gematria. They're not using runes. Yeah, I've been looking at the National Guard shooting. We're waiting for some more intel, but I'm saying is that the way it's being responded to is completely consistent with the 9/11 related propaganda infusion that we've had since Dick Cheney died. Again, the architect of 9/11. And there may be some connections to with America's withdrawal from Afghanistan. There's something going on with it, as far as it's a propaganda event. No reason to think it's real, but we're going to get more facts today, I'm sure. Plain Dakota says, Rabbi Gematria, even some of the codes are undeniable. They leave. Okay, well, here's the thing. There's no predictive capability. And the way that they're arriving at the connections is based on what you would call the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. So these aren't valid connections. They're correlations, they are connections, but there's no indication that these connections are somehow the result of something divine. Like, they're actually completely normal coincidences that you would expect. They're not statistical anomalies. They're trying to create the perception of statistical anomalies, which would preclude any explanation involving man. And I'm saying that's the main disinformation line. Because mankind could not have planned it so that Miss Piggy would have been introduced on the world stage 10,666 months before Erica Kirk got married to Charlie Kirk. Like, they're making connections like that. I'm like, how does that even make sense? They're just making random connections and they always get hits. Well, how do they get hits so often? How can they grab a random story about Miss Piggy and attach it to Erica Kirk and make it make sense? Well, they have 5 different calculators, for one. And 2, you can use this to make anything connect. Anything. It's unfalsifiable. So if it's unfalsifiable and it's logically fallacious, then what is it? It's bogus. It's based in lies. But these are clever lies, because you can't just say, oh, that's a lie, or you're lying, because they're lying through indirect means. So I would say these gematria pushers are liars, and they wouldn't want to hear that. But yeah, you're lying if you're positing anything more than something you made up. You're misrepresenting reality. So if you're misrepresenting reality, witchcraft, you're lying, you're manipulating, whether or not it's overtly exposable as a lie. Sometimes these things are subtle. And so then you have to ask yourself, am I going to give them a pass? Am I going to just not challenge them because they don't know that they're confabulating and spreading misinformation and adding a bunch of noise, drowning out our signal? I'm saying no. I don't think they get a pass. Lasers go pew pew, says useful idiots. Well, they're also egotistical. Like they're not going to break away from it. Their identities are attached to it, and they can never admit that they're wrong. So they're and not only that, but if you're a religious believer, you can't be wrong. If you have a religious conviction, it's unfalsifiable. So that's why I'm saying mainstream media is a religion, but so is alt media. You have a preconceived model. They've already got it all figured out, and they're just doing bias confirmation. And then my question is why? What is it that they're doing? What is this obsession? And now I think I get it. It's not organic. Their methodology for decoding news, when did that become a thing? When did it become a thing that you could grab a book on Jewish gematria intended for making connections in scriptures and Torah? Where did they get the idea that you could take this and plug it into the nightly news and decode things? Like, does anyone else see this as just intrinsically absurd? Like, there's no sanity in it. I mean, if it were true, and if they were calling out and predicting events using Jewish gematria, Kabbalistic number magic, well, then they're occultists. So what are they? Are they occultists? And by the way, this stuff is all forced into their molds. I was talking to somebody about this morning, because it's used by, also it's used by the OTO and Thelema, Aleister Crowley. So you're using occult technology. Yeah, Aleister Crowley encoded gematria into his religious paradigm. The OTO does it. In fact, they worship the goddess. They call her Babylon. But they changed the spelling of Babylon from Babylon to Babalon. Why did they change it? Because they wanted Babylon to add to 156. So they altered the spelling of their goddess's name to fix the numbers, so that it would be balanced with the beast and his number. So again, even the people who use this don't pretend like it is anything more than subjective, symbolic encoding. I mean, they kind of still, a lot of the people do kind of fall for this stuff, but what I'm saying is the fact that they altered the name of their goddess to fit this tells you something. John Francis says it's absurd. It is absurd. And it's not Christian, by the way. So these Christian gematria pushers with their multiple calculators. Oh, here's my satanic calculator. Here's my Chaldean one. Ancient sorcerers use this one. Here's my English cipher. Here's my reverse English ordinal cipher. So they got 15 different calculators in their back pocket so they can decode the news and read the future. All right, well, that's not Christian. So we have these Christian gematria pushers bad-mouthing me because I'm calling them full of crap. Well, they're not even Christians. I'm sorry, like, according to your own belief system, you're going to hell because that's sorcery. So I don't care what these Christian black magic rabbi voodoo sorcerers have to say about our analysis. It's like not even relevant. The sad thing is that they have the big followings. They get the big footprint on X, which I don't think it's organic. Yeah, exactly, Dark Ghost. When I was just listening to a podcast about King Solomon, and they're using Solomonic magic. They're using Kabbalistic magic. And if you study black magicians like Aleister Crowley, this is what they do. They use this type of reasoning and thinking. And I think a lot of it is because these magical paradigms do require the sidestepping of the intellect. In fact, the Church of Satan's founder, Anton LaVey, he wrote about magical ceremony as an atheist, as an objectivist. But he said, in order to do magic, you have to suppress the intellect temporarily. So he called the ritual room itself, the ritual chamber, he called it a place to suspend disbelief, but he called it like the intellectual decompression chamber. And he said it was to suspend disbelief. So in other words, entering a temporary state of ignorance and mystification of the mind, which was a prerequisite to doing magic. So, kind of like people do drugs to achieve altered states. Well, it's a way of altering your perception. So again, I'm saying these Christian numerology guys are engaging in occultism. That's not on my soul. Not that I believe any of that stuff. There are so many fear tactics put into religions, and I think it's all to keep the sheeple in line, because they want you to be susceptible. They want you to think these connections mean something in a mystical sense. They don't want you to connect the dots and put it within a logical framework, a skeptical framework, which is what we have done. Dark Ghost Wind says, Andrew Tate looking like Anton LaVey. It's pretty hilarious when you see the kind of content he makes and what he talks about. Yeah, that's actually true. I think it might be intentional. They may have modeled his persona, which his persona's evolved over the years. But the persona he brought about is very much like LaVey. If you don't know Anton LaVey's history, he was a pimp. And he did play Calliope for the carnival. But he also performed music for the striptease. In fact, he had this group of topless dancers. They called him Anton's Witches. And one of the witches, a topless witch dancer's name was Susan Atkins. And she was the one who supposedly ripped the baby out of Sharon Tate. Think of the name, Tate, Sharon Tate. You know, the Tate Bianca murders, Charles Manson's killings. So the Charles Manson killings involved a woman named Sharon Tate, the victim. And she was killed by one of LaVey's witches, Susan Atkins. Well, if you haven't read his biography or about him, you can kind of see he writes about how he got his philosophy, but a lot of it was his background as a as a carny. But in particular, his group of topless dancers with this future killer is all really intriguing. But it has me really thinking about Andrew Tate's persona, because it is a persona. I think we all know this. And it's like they chose that image, which is based, it's kind of an archetypal villain thing. I think Anton LaVey's vision or his visage is borrowed from, who's that guy from Flash Gordon? The villain. Ming the Merciless. He might even have admitted that. Anyway, this has been interesting. I just wanted to bring up the Charlie Kirk thing. It goes deeper than we thought when it comes to South Park. The South Park predicted nuances about the event. Knocked off the chair to the left. Person asking the question looks the same. The nature of the question was the same. And it happened right before the event. Like, it's really just evidence that South Park is a propaganda vector for Psyop predictive programming. There's no way to rule that out. I mean, that is what we observed. So, in addition to that, the gematria calculator people are mad at me because I'm blocking them now. Because we're at the point where we need to create this schism. And you can't create a schism if you build bridges with people who are still holding on to the old paradigm. If this is a paradigm shift. And if you don't want your paradigm shifted, you want to stay in Trutherville, that's on you. But we need to draw the distinction. We want them to defend their lies. Yeah, defend your lies, defend your bad, outmoded operating systems loudly so we can separate from you. This is a separatist movement. Stu55 says, as far as magic goes, I drew the line at Chris Angel's Mind Freak. I saw a video where he levitated. The thing about magic tricks in general is that they only work if you stay in your seat and you let the magician tell you where to look. That's exactly how media operates. As long as your perspective is the one they give you, you will fall for all their tricks. So the way to see through it isn't to look closer at the screen, but it's to take a different perspective. The off-world stage perspective is a version of things that includes everything that's not specifically being pointed at that very moment. We're not taking direction from their magicians. Dark Ghost Wind says, occultism seems to be repackaged and redistributed every 100 years. Yeah, it certainly is consistently being brought up in new frames. And like the whole idea of manifestation, law of attraction, this all goes back to like H.P. Blavatsky and the Secret Doctrine. And I actually agree with a lot of what she says, H.P. Blavatsky, about how humanity consists of people on a various spectrum of soul awareness. Like a lot of people are basically soulless. They're animals with intellects, but they don't have higher spiritual functions like intuition, or they don't have perhaps even, it's almost like, and she suggests that there is a spiritual war between those who are unsouled and those that are. And I think that is true. I think there's something to it. I don't know if people get switched off or if they're deactivated or if they're latent, but I don't think that everybody is operating from the same perspective with regard to their relationship to the body-soul duality. Some people are a little more spirit than animal. Other people are a little more animal than spirit. I mean, that's the image of the devil card in the tarot. The devil represents the spirit as operating below the level of the material. That's the devil card represents the carnal superseding the spiritual. And we've been given an operating system to correspond with the worldview we've been given. And our operating system tells us that we're just a bunch of apes. All right, this has been interesting. We'll continue this conversation later. My phone's going to die here in a minute. But if you go to the Twitter account, IPS Think Tank, you can see the chart that I put out, which is Psyop Programming Timeline. Psyop Programming Timeline, which means we need to look at these things as taking place on a continuous basis within the same fictional universe. Again, we have two timelines. You got the real life that you live, you observe, you can test it, and then you have the version of things and the fake things that are superimposed on top of it. The thing is, these superimposed events that augment our collective reality are planned so far in advance that it raises serious questions about everything, about the nature of government and media, even politics. Makes me think that we're just surrounded by steam valves, that we're given illusions to make us think we have some level of control and we actually don't. That might be the big secret. I've already accepted it. Yeah, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. We'll be back later, likely.